Today, I just want to give you the latest updates on the stimulus packages that are currently in the House of Representatives and clarify some of the questions that I've been receiving, since I know it can be a little bit confusing since it seems like every few days a new member of Congress proposes their revolutionary stimulus bill. So if you want the latest update on how much money you can expect from the next stimulus bill, then stick around. Let's jump right into it. What is going on, everyone? I hope you are all having a fantastic day. So as you may have heard, there's been some new legislation that's been proposed in Washington and some important updates that I want to discuss with you today. So first, let's clarify exactly what's going on here. First, we obviously have the $1,200 checks that were part of the last stimulus bill that was passed towards the end of March, and I'm sure you know a lot about those by now. Then last week, we heard of those two congressmen who proposed a bill that would give every American above the age of 16 $2,000 per month for at least the next 6 months. If you didn't see my video about that bill, go ahead and check that out from last week, but we did go into detail on what exactly that would look like, and we talked about how it's pretty unlikely that this bill would actually get passed in its current form. Then flash forward to right now, and we have a new stimulus bill that again was proposed in the House of Representatives that would freeze all rent and mortgage payments at least until the end of the current national emergency, and that's what I want to focus on today. Now, of course, just like the other bills that have been proposed, they have to come with a catchy name, and this one is called the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act of 2020. Alright, so just a reminder that this is simply legislation that has been proposed and still has to go through the House of Representatives, the Senate, and then the President would obviously have to sign off on it. So just like the $2,000 a month bill that we talked about last week, this likely can and will be changed drastically if it even does get passed. But under this bill that was proposed, all obligations to pay your rent would be suspended immediately and could even pay you all the way back to March 13th when the national emergency was declared. This freeze on your rent would continue until the national emergency here in the US is lifted, whenever that would be. It's also important to clarify that unlike the pause on rent and mortgages under the last $2.2 trillion stimulus bill, this rent freeze would not require you to pay back your missed payments. The current rent and mortgage forgiveness plan that you've probably heard about simply delays your payments to a later date, but under this proposal, your rent or mortgage payments would be completely eliminated and you would not have to pay them back at a later date. This means that your landlord cannot charge you any fines for a late payment, cannot evict you for making a late payment, and cannot accrue any debt in your name, meaning they cannot force you to pay this amount back at a later date. They also cannot report you to a credit bureau or a debt collector. And that last point about credit is also extremely important to note, because what's currently happening with the current mortgage forgiveness plan is individuals are stopping their payments, but then this is being reported to the credit bureaus, and obviously as a result their credit score is plummeting, and that can have a lot of long-term damaging effects to their financial health. But in this current bill, under the section specifically about mortgages that we will talk about in a second, it specifically says that your paused payments cannot negatively affect your credit score. So the stipulations for individuals with mortgage payments are essentially the same, and all mortgages would be frozen until the national emergency is lifted. But this section is extremely vague, and a lot of individuals have brought up some very valid questions with regard to their mortgage payments. So since everyone gets the exact same benefit and everyone qualifies, wouldn't this mean that the billionaire who may own a $100 million home but decided to finance it, and yes, that does happen, wouldn't they get the same benefit as the person making minimum wage who is just trying to make their rent each month? The bill also doesn't really clarify whether the eliminated payments would be just your interest on your mortgage, or if this would include the principal, which honestly opens up a whole can of worms, since individuals with a shorter mortgage payment would get a much greater benefit than someone with a longer 30-year mortgage. Also, you may not know this, but typically with a standard mortgage, you start your payments with paying most of the interest first, and then over time slowly start paying more and more towards the principal or the cost of the home. This means that anyone who just recently started making payments on their mortgage can get a much larger benefit than someone who's already 15 or 20 years into their mortgage payments. And unfortunately, it does say that this only accounts for your primary residence, so you can't go buy a penthouse apartment in Hawaii and expect to pay nothing on that for a year. On the flip side of the coin, you also have the questions that have been brought up by a lot of landlords with regards to this bill, who would obviously not be receiving their rent payments. But thankfully, there is a whole section section about that, but before we discuss that, keep in mind that most landlords are really just everyday people who rely on their monthly rent payments in order to make ends meet. I know a lot of times when people think of a landlord, they think of a multi-millionaire who has all this money, but statistically that's just not the demographic. So with that being said, this bill does state that housing and urban development would establish a fund that would pay the landlords their missed rent for this entire period. However, it does come with a pretty significant catch. In order to qualify for this money, landlords must agree not to raise their rent for 5 years and can only evict a tenant for just cause. And it specifically says that they cannot evict based on credit history or even arrest record, which I know doesn't sound like a huge deal, but without looking at someone's credit history, how are you supposed to determine whether they are actually a good borrower or not? On top of all of that, they must also report any vacant units immediately to local housing officials so that these empty units can be filled with Section 8 tenants, which is affordable housing. And after that, you still have to disclose all of your assets, revenues, cash flows, and the landlords who are in the most dire need of this money will receive it from this fund first, meaning that if you're a responsible landlord with very little debt, then this bill really walks right over you. So basically what they're saying is, hey, no one's gonna pay rent for the next several months, but don't worry, we've got you covered, but you do have to agree to all of these rules, and otherwise you won't get anything. Oh, and by the way, if you do want to sell your multifamily home and walk away from this really bad headache that we've created, you first have to contact the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and give them 60 days to purchase your property before you can sell it to anyone else, which is basically a right of first refusal. On top of all of that, if a landlord does attempt to collect rent during this period, they will be charged $5,000 for the first time, $10,000 for the second, and up to $50,000 for the third attempt, and could even have their property seized from them. Look, I don't even own property, and this really would not affect me in any way, but I think most of us would agree that some of the stipulations in this bill are a little bit extreme. What's crazy is that if you calculate the total estimated cost of something like this, it would likely be somewhere around $1.3 trillion, depending on how long the national emergency lasts. And while that's obviously an astronomical number, that is nothing compared to, one, what's already been spent, and also the estimated cost of the plan with $2,000 a month to every individual that we talked about last week. So that's really the gist as far as the current stimulus package in regards to your freeze on mortgage and rents, but a lot of the comments from my last video on the $2,000 a month for the next 6 months said that that is way too extreme. But really, when you look at this bill and some of the crazy stuff in there, suddenly the simplicity of just giving everyone $2,000 a month for the next 6 months seems like a great idea compared to some of the complicated stuff in this stimulus bill. Again, the rent and mortgage freeze stimulus bill that we just talked about has absolutely no income threshold, meaning that every single person would qualify whether they need that help or not. At least under the $2,000 a month plan that we talked about last week, there is still an income threshold of $130,000 a year for individuals and $260,000 a year for couples. But I'm curious what you all think, so let me know down in the comment section below if you'd rather have your rent or mortgage frozen, or if you'd rather get $2,000 a month for the next 6 months. In addition to all of that, I also wanted to update you that just yesterday, the Senate passed an interim bill that will replenish the funds for both the PPP, which is the Paycheck Protection Program, as well as the EIDL grant money that you yourself might qualify for. The Paycheck Protection Program is more for medium to large businesses in order to continue their payroll through these difficult times, and you likely wouldn't qualify for that as an individual. But the EIDL money has been replenished with another $10 billion, and even if you just have a little side hustle, you could qualify for the $1,000 grant. Even if you just have a side hustle like driving Uber, or you have another business with your spouse, you and your spouse could each get $1,000 since they're giving $1,000 grants to every employee for your business. The House of Representatives is expected to vote on that interim bill on Friday, and the president will probably sign off on it over the weekend, so I'd say by Monday, the SBA will probably open applications again for these EIDL grants. So if you think you qualify, or even if you're not sure, it doesn't hurt to go ahead and apply, and you might get a few $1,000s out of this. I know all of these different stimulus bills can be a little bit confusing, and it can be hard to keep track of all of them, but I promise I will do my best to keep you updated on what exactly you can expect and how it will affect your financial health. As always, if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them down in the comments section below, and I am happy to give you my unprofessional opinion. And let me know if you'd rather get the $2,000 a month for the next 6 months, or if you'd rather have your rent or mortgage frozen. As always, thank you so much for your time. Be sure to subscribe for more videos like this in the future, and hit the like button if you did get value out of today's video. Take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.